riding our bikes, going over jumps, skipping school, and smelling like you came out of a cigarette factory? Growing up in the 70s and 80s, freedom to roam, the concept of free-range parenting wasn't a term in the 70s and 80s. It was simply called childhood. Saturdays meant boundless freedom. You'd slam down breakfast, maybe catch a few morning cartoons, and then head out the door with a simple instruction to be home before dark or be back for dinner. This independence was the cornerstone of childhood development during these decades. Parents rarely knew exactly where their children were throughout the day. Without cell phones or GPS tracking, kids could be anywhere within a mile or more radius of home. Neighborhoods became vast playgrounds where children would gather at vacant lots, in the woods, or friends' houses without formal arrangements. A knock on the door or a shouted name was all it took to assemble the day's crew. The geographical boundaries were remarkably loose by today's standards. Many boys knew the rule was to stay within earshot of mom's call, or within certain landmarks, the big oak tree, the corner store, or the railroad tracks. But these boundaries were elastic, and often stretched with age and proven responsibility. By age 10 or 11, many boys roamed several neighborhoods away or cycled miles from home without raising parental concern. One day, my friend Jeff and I rode our bikes from our seaside home, 6 towns over, 23 miles, one way. We were 12 and 13 years old. Had a new BMX bike, and he had what he called was a boat anchor, a bike made out of every other kind of bike. This thing was big and rugged. It took us all day from, let's say, 8 a.m. to get back in time for the dinner lights. A total of 46 miles was insane. The reason my friend Jeff wanted to go was to show me the imprint left in a rock at a church from the devil who supposedly jumped off the highest point of the church when he was being chased by the pastor. The name of the town is called Ipswich in Massachusetts. For anyone in the area, go check it out. You can find that info online about the devil's footprint. This freedom fostered an environment where boys learned to navigate social situations, physical challenges, and minor emergencies without adult intervention. They developed critical thinking skills, deciding which trails to cross, whose yard to avoid, or how to get home when a bike chain broke. Problem solving became second nature when there was no cell phone to call for help or GPS to find the way home. The absence of constant oversight also created space for creativity and risk assessment. Boys learned which jumps were too dangerous, which shortcuts were worth taking, and how to recognize genuine threats versus acceptable risks. This autonomy, while occasionally resulting in scrapes, broken bones, or neighborhood mischief, built resilience and confidence that shaped a generation's approach to independence. Bicycles weren't just transportation in the 70s and 80s. They were freedom machines, status symbols, and the centerpiece of countless adventures. The introduction of BMX bikes in the early 70s revolutionized childhood mobility, bringing a new element of daring and skill development that shaped an entire generation of boys. Homemade ramps constructed from plywood and cinder blocks became weekend projects. Boys would gather scrap lumber from construction sites or garages, creating increasingly elaborate jump structures. The quality of your ramp determined neighborhood status, and the courage to test new jumps built character and resilience. We as kids would gather by this big dirt pile that we turned into a jumping area. I was typically bad at going over jumps, as most times I would crash and get messed up. This time I was told to pull up on my front tire. So I did. The next thing I knew, I was laying on the ground looking at all of my friends laughing at me. The moment seemed to be in slow motion as I knocked the wind out of me. I was gasping for air. Jeff ran to get his mother, who was a nurse. She came riding down on Jeff's bike with her legs out and drove right past me. Someone ran to get my dad, and he showed up in our station wagon and told me to get in the car. I crawled to the car. My dad took me to the hospital as I was crying in pain. They found out that I fractured my back and had to be in a back splint for some time. One other time, I went over a jump again with my friend Jeff, and I landed so hard that I bent my new seat bar. Back when I landed and I was stuck between the bent seat and the back tire as I crashed into the woods. My friend Jeff was laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. Trying to get me free from that situation was awful. My ass and my balls were both slammed and killing me. I was done for the day. Bikes represented more than recreation. They were the primary means of transportation and independence. Before the era of organized playdates and constant parental shuttling, a reliable bike meant you could visit friends, explore new territories, or make it to the convenience store for candy and comic books. Bikes were rarely locked up, and theft was less common in many neighborhoods, reflecting the different social dynamics of the era. The physical skills developed through countless hours of riding translated into confidence in other areas of life. Mastering wheelies or jumping techniques required persistence, calculated risk-taking, and learning from failure, sometimes painfully. The road rash and occasional broken bones were considered acceptable consequences of the freedom bikes provided. For the lucky few, mini bikes and dirt bikes represented the ultimate childhood prize. Parents were often more relaxed about motorsports, with everyone riding without helmets or proper safety gear. I never had a motorcycle as a kid, but I did have a $75 go-kart that everyone wanted to drive. It was a homemade cart with a 5-horsepower Briggs and Stratton engine that would go about 20 or 25 miles per hour. My friend and I would get up around 5 a.m. on Saturday morning and push the go-kart to the end of the driveway so that my parents wouldn't hear us. The cart only had one seat, so we took a grocery carriage from the grocery store and pulled the basket off of it. We used the chassis and wheel section to sit in and tie a rope around the back of the go-kart so that we both could go. So off we went at 5 a.m. down the main road, pulling the grocery chassis behind me with my friend in it. Our destination was the dog track that was about 1/4 of a mile away. We would ride around there until people started to show up. Heading back home was the scary part, as now the road was busy and we didn't know where the cops were. Getting into trouble at school. School discipline in the 70s and 80s operated under fundamentally different assumptions than today's educational environments. The concept of boys will be boys was deeply ingrained in school culture, creating an atmosphere where certain types of mischief were almost expected as part of normal development. Classroom disruptions, minor pranks, and talking back to teachers were handled with immediate consequences rather than documented incidents or parental conferences. Typical school pranks range from the harmless to the more elaborate. Spitballs launched through hollowed-out pens, paper airplanes sailing across classrooms, and strategic placement of thumbtacks on seats were common low-level disruptions. More ambitious troublemakers might orchestrate classroom escapes through windows, set off stink bombs in hallways, or engineer elaborate schemes to disrupt standardized testing days. Teachers wielded considerably more autonomy and discipline than their modern counterparts. When caught misbehaving, boys might find themselves standing in hallways, writing repetitive sentences on chalkboards, or staying after school for detention. Physical punishment, while increasingly controversial through this period, remained an option in many districts, with paddles hanging visibly in principals' offices as deterrents, especially in the parochial schools where the nuns would smack your knuckles with a yardstick. Teachers had authority to issue immediate consequences without extensive documentation or parental involvement. A disruptive student might be sent to stand in the hallway or to the principal's office, with the matter considered resolved after the punishment was served. Physical consequences. Corporal punishment remained legal in many states throughout this period. While its use declined through the 80s, the possibility of being paddled for serious infractions remained a powerful deterrent in many schools. When parents were informed of misbehavior, they typically supported the school's authority rather than challenging it. Being in trouble at school usually meant being in bigger trouble at home, creating a unified disciplinary front. Perhaps most distinctly different from today's approach was the expectation that boys would work out many of their conflicts independently. Playground disputes, name-calling, and even minor physical altercations were often viewed as normal social development rather than bullying incidents requiring intervention. Teachers might monitor from afar, but expected boys to establish their own hierarchies and boundaries through these interactions. The administrative response to trouble also reflected different values. Rather than extensive documentation, parent-teacher conferences, or behavior intervention plans, discipline was often handled through straightforward consequences designed to create immediate behavioral change. This approach emphasized personal responsibility in moving forward rather than analyzing underlying factors or addressing systemic issues. The term latchkey kid entered the American lexicon during this era, describing children who regularly returned to empty homes after school. With the rapid increase in dual-income families and single-parent households throughout the 70s and 80s, millions of children found themselves responsible for their own after-school hours. By age 10, many boys routinely came home to houses where parents wouldn't return until 5:30 or 6 p.m., creating a daily period of complete self-sufficiency. This daily independence created unique routines and responsibilities. Upon arriving home, latchkey kids would unlock doors, with keys often worn around their necks or hidden under doormats. The first task typically involved securing the house locking doors behind them and following parental rules about answering phones or doorbells. Many homes had explicit instructions written down which neighbors to contact in emergencies, what snacks were permitted, and which household chores needed completion before parents returned. The absence of constant entertainment options created different patterns of time usage. Television offered limited viewing, with just a handful of channels, so we turned to other solo activities like building model cars, reading comic books, or playing with action figures. Homework was often completed in solitude, without the benefit of parental assistance or oversight. For those with siblings, the oldest child frequently assumed a pseudo-parental role, mediating disputes and ensuring basic safety rules were followed. This regular solitude fostered both independence and occasional loneliness. The quiet of an empty house could be both liberating and isolating. Many latchkey kids developed strong imaginations and self-reliance out of necessity. They learned to manage time, handle minor emergencies, and make decisions without immediate adult input. While modern parenting often emphasizes constant supervision and structured activities, the latchkey experience created a generation comfortable with solitude and capable of self-direction from an early age. This is when I turned 13. I wanted to play guitar, so I told my parents all I wanted for Christmas was a guitar and amp. My mother actually told me no, that I quit everything that I started, and she wasn't going to waste any money on instruments. She was right. I did quit everything that I tried. Football, baseball, trumpet. I was awful at all of those things. 10 days before Christmas, she brought me to the local music store and purchased an electric guitar and amp for me. All of my nagging finally got to her, and she gave in. I was glued to that guitar. Now she had to deal with a different type of problem. Loud music and disgusting guitar playing. We lived in a mobile home, so we had pocket doors rather than regular doorknob doors. I would shove a book into my pocket door when it was closed so that no one could open it and crank up my amp to practice. I would hear my mom pounding on the door, yelling at me to stop playing or turn it down. The omnipresence of cigarette smoke formed an inescapable backdrop to childhood in the 70s and 80s. Public spaces, private homes, and virtually all forms of transportation existed under a perpetual haze that would be unimaginable to children today. Smoking wasn't just common, it was woven into the fabric of daily life, with ashtrays, standard fixtures in homes, restaurants, and even doctors' offices. Bars and restaurants of the era bore little resemblance to their contemporary counterparts. Walking into a neighborhood tavern meant immediate immersion in a thick cloud of cigarette smoke that clung to clothing and hair for hours afterward. These establishments, where families often gathered for weekend meals, featured smoke-yellowed walls and ceilings, with ashtrays on every table, as standard as salt and pepper shakers. Children routinely accompanied parents to these smoky environments, where the distinction between smoking and non-smoking sections, when they existed at all, meant little in the open-air spaces. Weekend dinners at restaurants, bowling alleys, or family-friendly bars meant hours of passive smoke exposure that would violate modern public health standards. Kids would play arcade games in the corners of these establishments while adults socialized the smoke so thick it could irritate eyes and make clothing smell for days afterward. Car travel represented another smoke-filled domain. Long before smoking bans in vehicles with children, family road trips often meant hours confined in cars with parents smoking with windows barely cracked. Station wagons and sedans would fill with smoke that circulated through the vehicle's closed environment. The cigarette lighter built into car dashboards was a standard feature, used constantly throughout journeys. Children in the back seat would often wave their hands to disperse smoke clouds or lean toward partially open windows for fresh air. The health impacts of this constant exposure weren't yet fully acknowledged or understood. While the Surgeon General's warnings about smoking had appeared on cigarette packages since 1966, the concept of secondhand smoke as a serious health hazard hadn't penetrated public consciousness. Parents who would never directly harm their children thought nothing of smoking around them constantly, creating an environment that modern public health officials would consider hazardous. Automobile safety in the 70s and 80s operated under drastically different standards and cultural norms than today. The most striking difference was the casual approach to seatbelt use, which ranged from inconsistent to non-existent. Many cars from this era came equipped with basic lap belts, but their use was widely considered optional, a suggestion rather than a requirement. Children regularly bounced around vehicle interiors completely unrestrained during normal driving. In 1968, seatbelts first required in all new cars, but usage remains entirely voluntary with no enforcement mechanisms. 1978 Tennessee becomes the first state to require child restraint use. Most states still have no laws regarding children in vehicles. 1984 New York becomes the first state to pass mandatory seatbelt law for adults, though enforcement remains minimal. 1985 to 1990. Most states gradually adopt seatbelt laws, but they are typically secondary enforcement, only tickets issued only if stopped for another violation. The freedom of movement within vehicles created distinctly different travel experiences. On family road trips, children commonly sprawled across back seats, lay in the rear cargo areas of station wagons, or even sat on parents' laps in the front seat. The footwells of back seats became play areas where siblings might compete in card games during long journeys. These practices, deeply hazardous by modern understanding, were standard family travel arrangements. Station wagons, the family vehicle of choice during this era, featured a unique way-back area of the rear-facing third row that became prime real estate for children. These seats offered no restraint systems whatsoever, with children facing backward to wave at following vehicles or make faces at other travelers. During less formal trips, kids might simply spread out in the cargo area behind the second row, creating makeshift play spaces with pillows and toys. The combination of unrestrained movement and cigarette smoke created a distinctive sensory experience for children during car travel. Windows would be partially open to allow smoke to escape, creating loud wind noise and occasional relief from the closed environment. Motion sickness was common, exacerbated by reading and moving vehicles and the inability to see the horizon from lower positions in the car. The absence of child safety seats, for all but the youngest passengers, also meant that even toddlers quickly graduated to regular vehicle seating. Infants might ride in rudimentary plastic carriers, but by age 3 or 4, most children sat in regular seats, often standing on the floorboards to see out windows or kneeling backward to interact with the environment outside the rear window. The technological landscape of the 70s and 80s bears almost no resemblance to the connected world of today. Growing up during this era, the absence of digital technology meant developing fundamentally different skills and experiencing a childhood untethered from screens and instant communication. This technological simplicity shaped everything from daily routines to emergency preparedness. Communication technology was fixed rather than mobile. Home telephones with corded handsets served as the family's connection to the outside world, with most households sharing a single phone line. Long-distance calls remained expensive enough to be reserved for special occasions or emergencies. When away from home, communication required planning, and often coins-pay phones stationed at gas stations, shopping centers, and street corners provided the only means to contact parents when plans changed or emergencies arose. Navigation required spatial awareness and memory rather than GPS systems. You learned to read paper maps, remember landmark-based directions, and develop mental models of their surroundings. Go 3 blocks past the water tower, turn right at Johnson's Grocery, and it's the blue house with the big oak tree. Represented typical directions. Getting lost was a genuine possibility, requiring problem-solving skills rather than recalculating routes. Everyone always carried a quarter for emergency calls. Phone booths were lifelines in unexpected situations requiring memorization of important phone numbers. Glove compartments contained folded road maps that required spatial reasoning skills to navigate. Gas stations gave away free state and local maps. Before Google, research meant consulting multi-volume encyclopedia sets or visiting libraries. Entertainment technology existed at a fraction of today's options. Television offered 3 to 5 channels in many areas, with programming aimed specifically at different age groups at designated times. Saturday morning remained sacred territory for children's cartoons, while weekday afternoons featured a limited selection of after-school specials and reruns. Without recording capabilities in most homes, missing a favorite show meant waiting for reruns months later. Music required physical media and dedicated devices. Vinyl records played on family stereo systems, while personal music arrived with the introduction of portable cassette players in the late 70s and early 80s. Creating personalized music collections meant recording songs from the radio, carefully timing the press of the record button when favorite tunes began. The mixtape represented the height of musical personalization and social currency among friends. Video games, when available, existed as standalone experiences rather than connected platforms. Early home systems like Atari offered primitive graphics and gameplay without save features, online components, or continuous updates. Arcade games required quarters and trips to dedicated gaming spaces, creating natural limitations on screen time that today's devices lack. Gaming remained a special activity rather than a constant background presence. Perhaps no aspect of childhood has changed more dramatically than the nature of play itself. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, play was largely self-directed, unstructured, and free from adult oversight or organization. This fundamental difference shaped not only daily activities but the development of creativity, problem-solving, and social skills in ways that structured, supervised play cannot replicate. Neighborhood games evolved organically, with rules negotiated and modified by the participants rather than imposed by adults. A vacant lot might transform into a baseball diamond with old boxes or rocks serving as bases. Football games adapted to available space, with parked cars or trees establishing boundaries. These games operated without uniforms, referees, or formal teams' captains chose sides on the spot, with team composition changing daily based on who was available to play. Construction play fostered both creativity and practical skills. Fort building became a summer tradition, with children scavenging construction site scraps, discarded furniture, or fallen branches to create hideouts and clubhouses. These structures evolved over days or weeks, with design improvements implemented through trial and error. The process taught basic structural engineering concepts, tool use, and collaborative problem-solving outside any formal educational framework. Exploration played a central role in unstructured play. Wooded areas, stream beds, and undeveloped land became territories to map and claim. We knew every tree, rock formation, and potential hideout within a mile radius of home through direct exploration. These expeditions sometimes yielded discoveries, abandoned structures, unusual plants, or wildlife that sparked further investigation and learning driven by genuine curiosity rather than educational requirements. Risk assessment developed naturally through unstructured play. Without constant adult supervision, children learned to evaluate which trees were safe to climb, how high was too high for a bike jump, or when a frozen pond was thick enough to support weight. This organic risk calibration happened through observation, peer guidance, and occasional minor injuries that served as powerful learning experiences. How it's different for kids today. The childhood experience has undergone a profound transformation since the 70s and 80s, with today's children navigating a fundamentally different landscape shaped by technology, safety concerns, and changing cultural values. These shifts have created new opportunities while simultaneously eliminating certain formative experiences that defined previous generations. Today's children maintain continuous contact with parents and peers through smartphones and messaging apps. This constant connection eliminates both the isolation and independence that characterize previous generations' experiences. Many experiences now occur through or alongside screens, with digital entertainment and social interaction replacing direct physical and social engagement with the world. Safety focus. Modern parenting prioritizes physical safety through continuous supervision, organized activities, and structured environments. The concept of acceptable risk has narrowed significantly, limiting opportunities for independent risk assessment. Contemporary childhood follows detailed schedules of school, extracurricular activities, and planned playdates. Free, unstructured time has decreased dramatically, replaced by adult, organized, and supervised experiences. Perhaps the most significant change comes from the elimination of unsupervised time and independent mobility. Today's children rarely experience the neighborhood freedom that defined childhood in previous decades. The radius of independent travel has shrunk dramatically, with many children never venturing beyond their own yards without adult supervision. Concerns about traffic, strangers, and general safety have created a more contained childhood experience where parents maintain awareness of their children's locations and activities at all times. Technology has fundamentally altered social development. Relationships now form and maintain through digital channels alongside in-person interaction, creating complex social dynamics that span both physical and virtual spaces. While this connectivity offers certain advantages, maintaining contact with distant friends, finding communities of shared interest also introduces social pressures, comparison, and performance aspects to friendship that previous generations didn't face. The constant documentation of experiences creates a curated presentation of life rather than simply living it. Health and safety standards have transformed dramatically. Smoking has virtually disappeared from public spaces, with only 12.5% of adults smoking today compared to nearly half the adult population in the late 1960s. Car safety has improved immeasurably, with comprehensive seatbelt laws, child safety seats, and vehicle design creating much safer transportation. These changes, while unquestionably positive for physical health, have eliminated certain sensory experiences and freedoms that once defined childhood. Entertainment has evolved from shared, scheduled experiences to personalized, on-demand consumption. While children in the 70s and 80s watched the same limited selection of shows and movies, creating universal cultural touchpoints, today's children access virtually unlimited content tailored to individual preferences. This shift provides greater choice, but reduces the shared cultural experiences that once connected peers and generations. Academic and achievement pressures have intensified significantly. Today's children face earlier academic expectations, more standardized testing, and greater competition for educational opportunities. The relatively relaxed academic environment of previous decades has given way to achievement culture that often begins in preschool, with parents and educators focused on measurable outcomes and future prospects from increasingly early ages. While these changes bring many advantages, greater safety, more educational opportunities, reduced exposure to harmful substances, they have collectively eliminated core experiences that shaped previous generations. Independence, unstructured creativity, natural risk assessment, and direct, unmediated engagement with the physical and social world. The challenge for parents and educators today lies in preserving these developmental opportunities within the context of contemporary reality, balancing the benefits of modern childhood with the formative experiences that build resilience, creativity, and self-reliance. Well, there you have it. Kids today grow up with advanced technology, instant access to information, and heightened social awareness. Unlike the 70s and 80s when play was more physical, media was limited, and social expectations was face-to-face. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Give your thanks to God.